Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today is June 1st, 2025, and I'll be giving my updated 2026 Senate elections prediction for the first day of the month. If you're unfamiliar with my videos in the rating system, the way I do it is like this. There are 4 different race ratings. There is solid, which means a 15% margin of victory or more for either the Democrat or the Republican. There is likely, which is a margin of victory between 5% and 15%. There is lean, which is a margin of victory between 1% and 5%. And then there is tilt, which is a margin of victory of under 1% of the vote. So with that said, I'm going to start with filling out the safe states in the 2026 Senate elections. First, I'm going to do the states that I think are safe Democrat at this time. These are the states of Oregon, Illinois, Delaware, New Jersey, Rhode Island, Massachusetts. And I think that's going to be it for the initial safe states. There are some other states that are very close to being safe Democratic that could be likely, but I am going to be putting in the safe Democratic category. These are the states of Virginia and Colorado. Both of these in the right election environment could potentially be competitive, but given they have strong incumbents in these races, I expect they'll be over 15% of the vote. Other safe races now for the Republicans in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, South Dakota, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, and West Virginia. Some other states that, like Virginia and Colorado, are right around being safe or likely depending on the candidates. First, the state of Florida with Republican Ashley Moody. I think right now this starts out as safe Republican. The state of Nebraska, this is all contingent on if the independent Dan Osborne, who ran for Senate in 2024, decides to run for Senate again. If he does, I think this race would be under a 15% margin of victory for the Republicans. If he does not, I think the Senator Pete Ricketts, the Republican, will win by more than 14 or by more than 15 points. So I have it starting as safe Republican, but that's certainly a very important and close one to watch. Lastly, I have the state of Alaska. It's looking like the Democratic former Representative Mary Peltola will be running for either governor or House in 2026 and not for Senate, which I think takes any real problem away for Alaska being competitive. The Republican incumbent Senator Dan Sullivan should win by more than 15 points. This puts the Republicans up to 48 Senate seats, Democrats up to 42. There are 10 Senate seats remaining. Now we're going through the races that I currently have listed as likely for the Democrats and the Republicans. The first seat I'm going to start with is the state of New Mexico. This is Democratic incumbent Senator Ben Ray Lujan. He was elected back in 2020. Pull up the Senate map here. Back in 2020, he did win with a 6.1% margin of victory, though we did see in 2024 a Senate race where the Democratic Senator Martin Heinrich won by 10.1%. I think it's more likely we see a margin of victory similar to 2024 in New Mexico than 2020, but I am going to start New Mexico out as likely Democratic at this time. Also likely Democratic, I have the state of Minnesota. For right now, Minnesota, the Senate race is going to be open as the incumbent Democrat Tina Smith is retiring and will not be running for re-election. As for who's going to be the Democratic candidate in the state of Minnesota, that is still to be determined. There are 2 Democrats running right now, Angie Craig, a U.S. representative from Minnesota's 2nd District, and Peggy Flanagan, who's the lieutenant governor of the state of Minnesota. I expect that Democratic primary to be very competitive. The problem for the Republicans in this race is despite Minnesota being a lean to likely Democratic state, Republicans don't really have a top-tier Republican recruit at this time. Royce White, the former Republican nominee for Senate in 2024, is running again, though he did lose to Amy Klobuchar, the other Democratic senator, in Minnesota by 15 points. I don't think White, if he's the nominee, is going to lose as badly as he did in 2024, but I don't think he's going to be able to do well enough to get it under a 5-point margin of victory. Minnesota, I have starting out in the likely Democratic category at this time. Next, we have the state of Texas. Texas is expected to be actually more competitive in this election due to the fact that Republican incumbent Senator John Cornyn is facing a primary challenge from Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. There hasn't been much polling done so far for the general election, but most of the Republican primary polling shows Paxton leading over Cornyn. When the hypothetical polling that's been done so far showed Colin Allred with a big lead over Ken Paxton, the ratings on this one are in between solid and lean, so it's kind of all over the place. I currently have the state of Texas starting out in a likely Republican win. We did just see in 2024 Ted Cruz win by 8.5% over the Democrat Colin Allred. If Ken Paxton's a Republican nominee, I expect him to win by a smaller margin of victory than Ted Cruz, but I do still think he'll eclipse that 5-point margin of victory in the state. This puts Republicans up to 49. Democrats are at 44. We do just have a handful of states left that I think are likely, one being the state of Iowa with Republican Senator Joni Ernst. Iowa is a very interesting state because in 2022 it voted for Chuck Grassley by 12.2%, a likely Republican win. 2020 it voted for Joni Ernst by 6.5%, another likely Republican win. Looking at the Senate map, or the Senate race for Iowa in 2026, Joni Ernst will be running again as the Republican. The Democrats are running Nathan Sage, and 3 other Democrats have expressed interest in potentially running. I think it's possible that it could be competitive. One Data for Progress, which is a Democratic-sponsored poll from early May, showed Nathan Sage leading over Joni Ernst by 2 points. Will it actually end up being that close? We'll have to wait and see, but I think Ernst starts out right now as the early favorite in Iowa. And now into the 6 remaining battleground states of the Senate map. One that's right on the edge between being a likely and lean rating for me is the state of Ohio with Republican incumbent Senator Jon Husted. This race is really very contingent on what happens with former Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown. At this time, Jon Husted, the incumbent U.S. Senator, might be facing off against Sherrod Brown, the former U.S. Senator. He's expressed interest in running for this race. I will say right now, I currently have the race listed as likely Republican, as Sherrod Brown has not officially declared he is running yet. But if Sherrod Brown were to announce that he's running, this race almost immediately becomes a lean Republican race. One poll from YouGov in Bowling Green State showed Husted and Brown a 3-point lead for Husted under the 4.1% margin of error. Brown just lost a very close Senate race to the Republican Bernie Moreno in 2024 by 3.6%. Sherrod Brown gives the Democrats the best chance in this race, and again, if he decides to run, this will go down to a lean Republican, but until he does, for now, I'm leaving the race as likely Republican, as without Sherrod Brown in the race, I believe Husted will win by more than 5 points, but under 15. That Senate race was 3.6%. J.D. Vance won his Senate race in 2022 by about 6.1% over Tim Ryan. This is the margin of victory I'm expecting for 2026, as long as Sherrod Brown does not run in the Senate race. So with that, that puts the Republicans at 51 Senate seats. Democrats are at 44. 5 remaining Senate seats, all of which I expect to be under 5% margin of victory when everything is said and done on Election Day. And I'm going to start with the lean states, starting with the state of New Hampshire. New Hampshire, this is Democratic incumbent Senator Jeanne Shaheen. She is retiring in 2026 and will not be running for another term. Right now, the U.S. Representative from the 1st District, Chris Pappas, is the only Democrat candidate in the race. He has consolidated support. He's gotten the endorsements of fellow U.S. Rep. Maggie Goodlander, former U.S. Rep. Annie Kuster, and he's also gotten the endorsement of Senator Jeanne Shaheen and Senator Maggie Hassan. He's going to be the Democratic nominee. On the Republican side of things, after Chris Sununu's announcement that he will not be running for U.S. Senate, former Massachusetts Senator Scott Brown is the likeliest Republican candidate at this time. He's also not officially announced that he is running yet, but all signs are pointing towards him running. Right now, Inside Elections has it as battleground. Cook and Sabato have it lean Democrat, and Race to the White House has it as tilt Democrat. There's not been any polls done yet for Pappas versus Brown. The only polls from Jeanne Shaheen versus Scott Brown from back in February that showed Shaheen by a large margin of victory. But I do think New Hampshire will be close, in large part due to the fact the presidential race in 2024 was only a 2.8% win for Kamala Harris over Donald Trump in the state. However, it is worth noting the last Senate race, Maggie Hassan versus Don Bolduc, ended up being a 9-point win for Maggie Hassan. New Hampshire, I'm starting out in the lean Democratic category. I would have Chris Pappas beating Scott Brown right now by about 4.5%, which is about a 1.5 bigger than the 2014 margin of victory, where Jeanne Shaheen did defeat Scott Brown in New Hampshire by 3.2%. I think we could see a similar matchup, but in 2026 for the margin of victories. So that's the state of New Hampshire. That puts the Democrats up to 45. Now we have the 4 remaining Senate seats that I think are the real battleground toss-up seats of this election. New Hampshire has the potential to be a real battleground seat, but I think these 4 are where things are really going to be shown. Now we have the state of Maine with Republican incumbent Susan Collins. Susan Collins is probably one of the more vulnerable senators in these elections. Maine is a likely Democratic state, at the presidential level, and when Angus King runs in his Senate races, he wins routinely by more than 15 points. Democrats, however, are having a very hard time trying to get a Democratic candidate to go up against Susan Collins. They have Jordan Wood, a former chief of staff to a U.S. Representative Katie Porter, but I don't expect Jordan Wood to be able to put up a strong enough fight to defeat Susan Collins. If the current governor of Maine, Janet Mills, decides to run, that would give the Democrats a formidable candidate, but we'll have to wait and see how that all goes. Inside elections and race to the White House have it as a toss-up. Cook Politico and Salvador Cristobal have it as lean Republican. We did see Susan Collins win in 2020 by 8.6%. I'm fully expecting 2026 will be a lot closer. Some recent approval polls show Susan Collins underwater by a lot, but that isn't really too dissimilar to where she was standing in 2020. Until a stronger Democratic candidate gets in the race, I'm expecting Maine to be around a 4-point victory or so for Susan Collins. I'm not sure if undecided or if ranked choice voting will have to go into effect for Susan Collins to win this race, but right now I think she starts out as the narrow favorite to win this Senate race. Puts the Republicans at 52, Democrats are at 45. Now we have the state of Michigan. Michigan's a very interesting state because it just voted for Donald Trump in 2024 at the presidential level, and it narrowly voted for the Democrat, Elisa Slotkin, at the Senate level by just 0.34%. So a very, very close race. This is Democratic Senator Gary Peters, who is not running for re-election. 4 Democrats are now running in this Democratic primary. We're going to have to wait and see how that all plays out, with another Michigan Attorney General, Dana Nessel, Democrat, potentially running as well. The Democratic primary is wide open, and we're going to have to wait and see how it all plays out. On the Republican side of things, the Republican nominee from 2024, Mike Rogers, is running again, and until another candidate like Bill Huizenga or Tudor Dixon enter the race, I fully expect Mike Rogers should be the Republican nominee without too much of a problem. Their entry could complicate things, but we'll have to wait and see. Hypothetical polling does show Rogers would narrowly lose in that race, but all 3 prediction sites have this race as a toss-up. Race to the White House, tilt Democrat. Haley Stevens versus Mike Rogers, the only poll, has a 6-point lead for Rogers, but again, we'll have to wait and see how that all goes. My main reasoning for this race, given the very close victory in 2024, this is when Mike Rogers had Donald Trump at the top of the ticket to help him out. There's pros and cons in this race for both Republicans and Democrats. Mike Rogers, having just ran at the top of the ticket in 2024, more people in Michigan will know who he is and will know his name, which gives him a bit of a leg up over the Democrats. But Mike Rogers will also not have Donald Trump running at the top of the ticket to help him this time, which I think does give the Democrats a narrow advantage in this race. I'm going to put Michigan starting out right now in the lean Democratic category, having it around a 2% victory for the Democrat over Mike Rogers at this time. Large reason being that Donald Trump will not be at the top of the ticket to help Rogers get Republican voters out to vote. Now we have 2 remaining Senate seats, one in North Carolina and one in Georgia. North Carolina, I think, is going to be the closest Senate race in the United States in 2026. This is Republican incumbent Tom Tillis. He's facing some calls in the Republican Party for a Republican primary challenge due to him being unpopular with more of the MAGA wings of the Republican primary, and his approval ratings have not been too high as of yet. Right now, Tom Tillis in a Republican primary does seem to do well enough, but also against certain candidates would be losing by a lot, like Laura Trump. So we'll have to wait and see if he gets primaried. I don't think he will, but we'll have to wait and see. On the Democratic side of things, former U.S. Rep. Willie Nichols already declared he is running for this race. All eyes are on the former governor of North Carolina, Roy Cooper. His decision is expected to come in June of 2025, and if Cooper runs, I think this gives the Democrats a A-plus Democratic recruit and a very good chance at flipping this race. Willie Nichols, I think it's possible he can win this race, but it's going to be a lot tougher for the Democrats to do so. 3 out of the 4 rankings have this as a toss-up. Cook Politico has it lean Republican. For Tom Tillis versus Roy Cooper leads under the margin of error in every single poll, so it will be very, very close. The most recent Senate election in 2022 came from Republican Ted Budd, where he won by 3.2% against his Democratic opponent. In 2020, Tom Tillis narrowly won re-election by 1.7% against the Democrat Cal Cunningham. Third-party vote splitting being a large probably reason why Tillis was able to win. All eyes for this race are on Tom Tillis' decision, and kind of like with Ohio, I can't make the decision for Roy Cooper running yet at this time until he officially declares. I will say if Roy Cooper does decide to run and it's Cooper versus Tillis, I do have North Carolina going as tilt Democratic, but until he announces, I'm going to be keeping North Carolina as tilt Republican because I think right now Tom Tillis versus Willie Nickel will result in a Tom Tillis narrow under 1% victory. So again, the decision on Cooper to run in North Carolina is very big and will certainly sway my ranking on this. Right now, North Carolina is tilt Republican. And now we have the state of Georgia. This is Democratic incumbent Senator Jon Ossoff. It looked like for a while he could be in a lot of trouble if Republican Governor Brian Kemp chose to run for this race. Kemp decided he is not going to be running for this race, and now the Republicans are in kind of a scramble to replace him and find a Republican candidate that can win against Ossoff. 3 Republicans are currently running in this race. Buddy Carter, a U.S. rep from Georgia's 1st District. John King, Georgia Insurance Commissioner, is also running. 4 other Republicans have publicly expressed interest. A handful of other candidates are potential candidates as well. The early polling so far on the Republican primary, Marjorie Taylor Greene was leading in that primary. Without her in the poll, Mike Collins led. So Republicans are kind of in a weird situation trying to find out who they're going to run. As for the early polling, so far it shows that Jon Ossoff is leading about pretty much every single Republican except for Brian Kemp. The most recent Signal poll shows that Ossoff versus Brad Raffensperger would be a tied race. Otherwise, Ossoff is leading in every single race at this time. In 2020, Jon Ossoff won against David Perdue by 1.2%. Raphael Warnock won by 2.1% on that same ballot. In 2022, Raphael Warnock was able to beat Herschel Walker by 2.8% after ranked choice voting, or after the went to a runoff election because neither candidate broke 50% of the vote. As for right now, I think Jon Ossoff and the Democrats got very lucky that Brian Kemp was not running, and I think Ossoff will have to go to a runoff election to break 50% of the vote, but once they do, I think he'll win by more than 1% of the vote. I think he'll win, again, by about 1.5%, and he'll be able to win this seat and hold it for the Democrats. So right now, I have the Senate remaining the way it is at this time, with Republicans winning 53 seats, Democrats winning 47, with some very close calls out of North Carolina, Georgia, Michigan, New Hampshire, and Maine, and very candidate dependent on Ohio and North Carolina. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe. If you did, leave a comment below. Tell me what you think about this Senate map for 2026. What would your prediction be for the 2026 U.S. Senate if you had to make it today? Thank you so much for watching. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and hope to see you in a future video.